Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast with your hosts Brian Auten and Chad Gross. Join us for conversations and interviews on the topics of apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.
Why?
It would be bad.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Brian Auten, and I'm joined by Chad Gross. Well, what's new in the land of Gozer, Chad?
Dude, I am excited. The early reviews are in for Ghostbusters Afterlife. By the way, I know some of you listeners don't care, but hey, I do, so you got to listen. And they are great. It literally sounds like everything I would want the movie to be. It's heavy on nostalgia. The director is saying that it was amazing when Ernie Hudson and Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray came on set in their flight suits. Ghostbuster fans, you know what I'm talking about. Apparently, the young actors in the film are outstanding. Paul Rudd, one reviewer called him a comedy MVP in the movie, who I like Paul Rudd anyway. So I am super excited. I honestly was thinking about it today. I have never in 44 years been this excited for a movie.
Wow.
I can't wait.
Wow.
I can't wait.
There you have it, folks. That's you heard it right from the number one fan. So
yes. So be good, for goodness sake. Oh, somebody's coming. Okay, sorry, I had to get that in. All right, I'm done.
Is it the coffee or is it the movie reviews? I can't tell. Maybe it's both.
It's a combination, but I was pretty jacked from the movie review. So yeah, it's a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm, man.
Well,
try following that, Auten. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we'll try. We can only top that when Dune comes out, and I start talking about Dune. So,
oh yes, you'll have to educate me on Dune.
Yeah. Well, today we've got a great interview lined up. Now, if anybody's read Mama Bear Apologetics, they know that this is a super resource for parents targeted towards moms. So today we're identifying as moms. But at any rate, Mama Bear Apologetics, that original book was empowering your kids to challenge cultural lies. Well, now Mama Bear Apologetics, the ministry, has another great and I would say very timely book out, and it's called Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality, empowering your kids to understand and live out God's design. So the great thing about this book is it's going to be dealing with all of the issues that we see in culture today surrounding gender, identity issues, sexuality, and from a parenting standpoint, how do we talk to our kids about that? This is different than just having the proverbial sex talk with your kid and like, oh, this is going to be awkward. Well, how much more crazy is that nowadays when, children's cartoons basically are, showing two mommies and two daddies or whatever. So crazy days we're living in, and this book is targeted right towards that. And as a parent myself, I'm like, give me that book. I'll identify as a mama bear to read that book, because I need to be able to have these discussions with my kids, because for me, that's not that's my go-to apologetics topic. Let me just talk to my kids about that all day. First off, it's not my topic. And the other thing is, like, when it's not your topic and it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about, definitely I'm looking for the input from the author of such book, which would be Hillary Morgan Ferrar. She's the founder of Mama Bear Apologetics, and she's got a burden for providing accessible apologetics resources for busy moms. She has a master's degree in biology, and her specialties are scientific apologetics, dealing with doubt, and identifying causes and solutions for youth leaving the church. So I'm excited about this one because anything having to do with parenting and apologetics, hey, I'm into both of those things. And so looking forward to this conversation today. Got the Kindle book and been devouring it, and looking forward to speaking to Hillary today.
Let's get ready. Switch me on.
Hillary, thanks for joining us for the interview.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Well, I'm real excited to talk to you today because this new book, Mama Bear Apologetics Guide to Sexuality, empowering your kids to understand and live out God's design, been rapidly reading through it and thought, well, this is very timely But before we get into the book, maybe there are some people who are not familiar with you or your ministry. So could you tell our listeners a bit about yourself and your work?
Yeah, so I started Mama Bear Apologetics probably around 2015. I think we didn't go live until 2016 because I was having to learn how to, do podcasting and web development and all that stuff that you don't think about for ministry. But yeah, so the Lord just really put a burden on my heart for moms specifically. It had never occurred to me before, but I had a friend tell me that there was this large demographic of women out there who wouldn't read something unless it was by a woman for a woman. And coming from, being a daddy's girl, being in the sciences for college and, around guys most of the time, that just never even occurred to me. But so that was my first thing. And the second thing was I noticed that when we went to apologetics conferences, like every other conference a church might have, they always have childcare. The one kind of conference they never had childcare for was apologetics conferences. And so my thought is, if we have these women that are only listening to women and we kind of block them from going to the conferences because someone has to stay home with the kids, I think that moms are one of the biggest unused resources when it comes to apologetics. I mean, we can do all the youth apologetics in the world, but if you have an apologist in your own home, and women, a lot of times, I think there was one study I looked at that said moms of young children get more questions per hour than the Queen of England during an interview. So who do you think is getting these spiritual questions first? It's mom. So we decided we just wanted to do something specifically targeted towards moms. We don't teach children's apologetics. We try to aim it to where the moms can understand it well enough and then helping them break it down, how they can then break it down for their kids. And in that way, you're helping the mom equip herself first so that she can equip her children.
Well, great. Super. Now, so the new book, your first book with Mama Bear Apologetics was just sort of like guiding your kids through culture. And now this new one deals with one aspect of the culture that's moving at lightning speed,
yes,
which is around sexuality and gender. So how would you describe your goal in this book and what you're trying to equip readers with?
First off, I have to say this is the book I never wanted to write. My publisher even pitched me this book multiple times, and I said no. And then finally, I felt like the Lord being like, nope, it's time to do this. I think the area of sexuality is one of those areas in our culture where things are just getting so weird that your own intuitive common sense is not enough to really navigate the waters of what's happening sometimes in the public school, what's happening on social media, on TikTok, and just all the influences that your kids are having come at them. You have all these kind of ideologies that were from the 60s and the 70s, kind of birthed in feminism, birthed in queer theory, birthed in postmodernism, that have now trickled their way down to elementary school level. And a lot of times it's stuff that parents didn't even have to deal with sometimes, even when they were in college. So I think my number one goal is to help parents to understand, and especially moms, understand where what their kids are saying is coming from. And that's kind of our goal with both books. Is some people attack it by listing out every single question that a kid might ask. And what we try to do is we try to go underneath the question and say, what is the worldview that the child is already buying into that's actually causing the question? So we talk about this from a sexuality from a biblical perspective, looking at, what does the Bible have to say, Old Testament and New Testament? Why does it say that? What are some of the statistics around it? What's a healthier view of sexuality? And then part two, we go into how in the world did we get where we're at, where we can't even call boys, boys and girls, girls. And so we go into the new sex education standards, which within their founding mission and principles and guiding mission and principles section have the language inclusivity, which is essentially queer theory. They have intersectionality. They have social and reproductive justice and racial justice. So you got a little CRT, you've got the queer theory, you've got postmodernism, you've got intersectionality, every kind of social justice thing you can imagine packaged into this is how we're teaching about sexuality. And so I think parents really need to understand this because it's not like they are trying to tell the kids, yay, promiscuity is good. What they're trying to tell them is if you judge anybody else for who they are, their identity, sexuality has now become our identity, then you are not loving like Jesus did. And this people group has been oppressed. And so it is up to you, if you want to be a follower of Jesus and love like Jesus did, to lift up these voices of the outcast and the marginalized and step back and let them tell their stories. And so kids get this idea that there's this whole group of people that they need to protect and that they need to promote. And that happens to be a lot of times within sexual minorities, something that you would see the Bible saying, no, this view of sexuality is sin. So I think that's one of the ways that parents are getting blindsided on this, is because if you were to ask the child what they personally believed, it might sound like a biblical worldview. But what they're doing in actuality is, according to social justice, is promoting these other forms of sexuality. And eventually you can't have these two different worldviews. One of them's going to win out. And the one that you hear the most will be the one that wins out. Because as this one psychologist said, the brain has a hard time distinguishing between that which is familiar and that which is true. So the thing that's familiar to them is they're hearing all about the normalization of homosexuality, the normalization of just gender studies and transgenderism. That becomes normal to them, to where they're actually being taught, according to the NSCS standards, that healthy sexuality means that you explore all these different identities for yourself before you decide who you are. So we have kids that are trying out, maybe I am bisexual, maybe I am transgender. And once you kind of start trying these identities on, there's just not great stuff that follows along with that.
Yeah, I like a lot. I like a lot of what you're saying, especially attacking it from the approach of a worldview, because it also gives you that. We just had an interview a bit ago with Paul Gold.
Oh, yeah, I love Paul.
Yes, and on cultural apologetics, and one of the things that he was talking about is we don't only want to show something as true, we also want to show that it's attractive. And I think in that approach you're talking about, you're able to show kind of the deficiencies in a non-biblical worldview and the attractiveness of a biblical worldview.
Yes.
And so that makes a lot of sense. Lots of good stuff there. So how do you think kind of sex talk, if you will, you talked about what kids are facing today. What are some key ways that the sex talk that kids are going to hear has changed from, say, when we were kids versus what they're hearing today? What are two or three you would say, like, kind of key ways that that's changed?
Well, I mean, the obvious key way is we used to be able to talk about, you've got boys and girls, and it's like, well, hold on, you can't even start there anymore. You have to defend the fact that there is such a thing as a boy and a girl, or a man and a woman. One of the things that I encourage parents to do, especially in this book, is to create categories with their kids. Because one of the things that we do as we learn is we kind of have these categories in our head that as we experience different things, we place these experiences into categories. So one of the categories I like to talk about is things that are so powerful that they need to be guarded, so powerful and potentially dangerous that they need to be guarded, like things like nuclear bombs, firearms, controlled substances, all these things. It's like they're incredibly powerful and they can be incredibly destructive when misused. So if we can really get that category in their mind when they're young, then it's a lot easier to then one day say, sex is part of this category. It's something that's extremely powerful and can be extremely destructive when used wrong. So that's kind of like one of those things where you don't even have to bring up sex at the beginning. If they can start to see how powerful and how potentially destructive the sexual force is, I think that's at least a win right there. The other, there was two other things that I wish I'd been taught when I was younger. And one of them is this concept of what is sex. And if you look throughout the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament, you have both prophets that are kind of acting out what God is saying. It's almost like this type of performance art. Or you have things that are physical in the physical world that actually represent what's going on in the spiritual world. And so I think that's another category we can put in our kids' heads, that things that are physical that represent something going on in the spiritual realm. And I think sex is another one of those things that belongs in that category. And so
that's a good point.
Yeah. So defining sex as a man and a woman reciting their marital vows. It's this physical act that points back to a promise that was already made. It's not, I know some people like to just say sex is a promise. And I would say that's not even right, because you can promise things with lots of different people. But if you point back to a promise that you already made, sex outside of marriage doesn't make sense. It's like signing your name on a piece of paper and not on an actual document. Like you're held to, you can have a document in front of you, like a contract that has your name on it, but until you sign that document, it's null and void. Likewise, if you just have your name on a piece of paper, that's not agreeing to anything. sex is this way of like signing your soul onto this agreement that you made with another person for life. And I think understanding it like that, all of a sudden, everything starts to make a little more sense, and why this is so guarded. Why is God so emphatic, both throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, about safeguarding this practice? And the third thing that I really wish that I'd known, my husband got me this book called Sex and the Supremacy of Christ when we were first dating. He got it for me for my birthday because that's what apologist nerds in love do. They get each other books like that. And I think the portion that was done by John Piper, it was kind of like a collection of all these essays that were based on talks from a conference. He argues that sex and our ability, like our view of sexuality and our ability to see God correctly are intertwined. That if you introduce a distortion into one, you will have a distortion in the other. And so we see this happening all the time in the Old Testament, that when the Israelites start going through a kind of a pagan view of sex, like the temple prostitutes and all the different stuff that they did there, they literally start going pagan. And it's like their view of God gets so skewed, but it works the other way, that if you introduce a distorted view of God, you do have a distortion in your sexuality. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my gosh, I want to be able to see God correctly. And so once I understood how just absolutely intertwined those two things are, because sexuality also is pointing to our oneness with Christ in the future. And that we explain it a little better in the book because it kind of sounds weird right now. And I think that the fact that it does sound weird to us just shows us how distorted and perverted our view of sex has become. But placing it within the whole Christian worldview of what it's supposed to mean here and in the present, in the physical and in the invisible, in the future. I mean, it's this poem that we have just completely wrecked. And now we're trying to figure out why nobody can get it right. Why is no one getting the message?
Yeah, it's almost like you're saying that we've so cheapened and watered down the way that we talk about sex, even in Christian circles. And we almost have to resurrect the sacredness of it. And yes. the presuppositions that we bring to it, we're not thinking about it properly, is what I hear you saying. And I think that's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I'd say that the world, the way is sex positivity, which we have a chapter on sex positivity. The way the world views sex is pleasure and consent, and that's it. And the church has absorbed this idea that sex is all about pleasure and consent. Now, it started when we basically separated sex from procreation. And then once sex and procreation were separated, then sex and marriage got separated. It's like we keep divorcing it from all these different facets that it was meant to be in conjunction with. And now we're all confused, and it's not really a shocker why.
Yeah, it's crazy. The book is great. I like how it's laid out, where there's sort of like the theory and the practice. And you've kind of got a structure where you teach the reader to recognize something, to address it, to reflect on it. And can you walk us through how the book's structured? Because I want people to buy the book because I think it's a great tool. But it's organized in such a way where I came away feeling like, oh, now I understand this way better. And now I'm coming to the point where, okay, I can see myself being able to talk about this in a practical way. So there's a lot of practical, like, here are things you can do, here are discussion questions, here are some stuff you can talk with your kids, and maybe illustrations, or where, depending on their age and that sort of a thing. Can you talk a bit about how the book's organized as a tool?
Yeah. And so part of it, we took some of our structure from the first book, and part of it is separate. So in this book, parts 1 and 2, for the most part, are just part 1 lays a foundation for what the Bible says and why. And not only what the Bible says and why, but how are we called to interact with those who have a different worldview? Because one of the things that we kind of are notorious as Christians about doing is we can say the right thing in the wrong way. And we treat people as if they're the enemy, instead of there's these ideas, these ideologies that have held people captive. So how do we approach people who are maybe held captive to these bad ideas? How do we approach them differently than if we were approaching, say, just a rebellious person? So that would be section 1. Section 2 is, what are your kids already being taught? Because we can have this great, wonderful foundation, biblical worldview, but if we don't know how the enemy is already trying to distort it, we're not going to be able to be proactive when we're trying to address these with our kids. And then starting at around, I can't remember, I think it's chapter 8, we start in where we introduce this method that we call the ROAR method, which we introduced for book 1, the first Mama Bear Apologetics book. And ROAR stands for recognize the message, offer discernment, argue for a healthier approach, and then reinforce the ideas through prayer, discussion, discipleship, and prayer. So what we're doing with recognize the message is, what is the world saying about this? What is the message that they're trying to get across? Just without any kind of evaluation, just kind of laying it out there. Offer discernment is sadly missed step for a lot of people. And that's where we have to recognize that almost every lie out there is kind of has a kernel of truth within them. Sometimes it's a big kernel of truth. Sometimes it's a small kernel of truth. But figuring out what is something that we can agree on, what's a value that we can agree on, to where you are building bridges. Because if you just come at people's, just trying to knock down their worldview and try to do worldview surgery, and they don't understand, they don't even think you understand what they're saying. So if they don't think you understand what they're saying, they're not going to let you do any kind of worldview surgery on them, which is why I emphasize in the book, we can't refute that which we don't understand. So part of our jobs as Christians is to first understand what they're saying. So in offer discernment, we point out the good that this worldview has, the cause that it's taking up, because most bad things are a reaction to something bad that they've seen. So that's offer discernment. We go through what's good, and then we look at the lies that have snuck in there.
Going back to what you were saying, so a way to do that then would be to, when kids are being fed this message that you should stand up for the oppressed, right? Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. In that view, it's just been distorted a bit. Am I understanding that correctly? Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's a lot of stuff that we can affirm within social justice. There's little things, kernels of truth that we can affirm within critical race theory. And unless someone thinks that you understand the problem, basically everybody's identifying a problem, but then their solution to the problem is where we differ. Unless they think that you understand the problem that they're trying to solve, they're not going to listen to any of your solutions. And so when you can stand shoulder to shoulder on the same page and say, yeah, I see this problem. Like within social justice, do we have people who have been marginalized, who have been oppressed? Absolutely. Let's identify that. Well, is the solution to this, is this to now promote and protect an entire group of people? I would say that's a bad idea, because it doesn't distinguish between someone who's legitimately oppressed and, someone who's a serial killer. As long as they fall in that demographic, you can't distinguish them.
Right.
We need to show them that protecting people and standing up for people is based on individual actions. It's not based on belonging to a demographic, because that completely removes personal agency from all these categories, which is kind of what we're seeing happen, is that individual life choices suddenly don't matter. As long as you affiliate with certain demographics, then you're oppressed no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's just a bad solution. There's so many problems that come with that. But that kernel of truth, that problem that they're seeing, I think we should overemphasize how we see it too. And then it kind of breaks that wall down to where now you can have this discussion and people haven't gone into fight or flight or defense mode before you start saying, well, I'm also kind of knowing some of these problems. It seems like this idea and this idea is slipping in there. And then maybe they'll be able to say, well, yeah, that idea is not good. You can help recognize some of the lies that have snuck in. And then that's where you go to argue for a healthier approach. Argue for a healthier approach means let's look at all the problems that we've both identified, and let's look at how the Bible actually addresses this in a really satisfying way. And so that way we see the problem, we're just offering a different solution, but we've built those bridges along the way. And helping our kids to see it like that is going to help them to where they don't just, it kind of teaches critical thinking. And then the reinforce section is just, how do we reinforce this idea with our kids so that the repetition that they're hearing, the most familiar voice, is no longer the world's. It's now a biblical worldview.
Excellent. The best part about that is now when I hear that awful song Roar, now I can think about something. Now I can think about something positive,
There you go.
So that, but no, great stuff. I'm just kidding.
Chad, admit it. You were listening to that on the drive over to the studio, weren't you?
We know that's your guilty pleasure.
Man, I'm telling you, modern music and I just don't get along well.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't want to get off track. I'm sorry.
Here's another question just to throw in there, and that is, addressing parents who would simply try to, shelter their kids from the world and maybe just sort of hope their kids won't fall into what's happening in the world around them. That's one approach. And
sure is. That's an option.
It's kind of like wait for the lions to come. Maybe you would have some words to say about that. And then you also in the book you deal with where purity culture, where you kind of talk about how that in the 90s where that came about, where there was this huge emphasis on purity and keeping your virginity, and how some of those approaches really backfired and had a lot of unintended consequences. So maybe you can talk about both ends of that spectrum, where there's this, no, I'm just going to ignore it and hope that it doesn't affect my kids. And then there's this maybe legalistic hardline control element that also hurts, and maybe find the middle ground. How would you advise parents in that regard?
Okay, so for the first one, thinking that you can shelter your kids from these ideas, as long as they have no phones, you have no TV, they never see movies, and they never go to friends' houses, well, then you should be safe. So find yourself a good Amish community.
I thought I'd just throw you a softball there. That seems whack it right out of the park.
That seems doable. No problem.
Totally doable,
No
right?
problem.
As long as you're willing to do that.
Right.
And I just don't think it's possible to shelter our kids the way we used to, because, even when you're out shopping, they're going to see screens in the store, and they're going to see Pride Month. They're going to see everything out there. So I think that the days are past where culture helped to reinforce our biblical worldview. That was kind of the case for a while, and it's not the case anymore. Amy did some research. So she's one of the contributors to book 2 here. And I can't remember what it is, the research that she looked into, but they actually looked at parents who, and specifically moms, who either tried to shelter their kids from all these different ideas versus the moms who would let their kids watch stuff, but they would watch it with them and maybe put it on pause and discuss, was this a good idea? Was this a bad idea? And then they just looked at what kind of decisions these kids make later. And it turns out that the moms that sat down and had discussions with their kids were actually better equipped and made better decisions in the future than the ones who were just sheltered from everything. So I think that right there is telling us we need to get involved and we need to be talking about this, and our kids need to hear it from us. There's this psychological phenomena that I can't find the name of. I've asked all these psychology friends of mine, but it's this idea that whoever presents something first becomes the expert in your mind. So the first time I heard anything about intelligent design was from Michael Behe. It was just this mind-blowing, oh my gosh. And for years after, I couldn't remember what the lecture that he did was. After I got my master's in biology and after I'd, gone through the Discovery Institute summer seminar for intelligent design, and I was like, what was that first thing? So I still gravitated towards Michael Behe, and it just turns out it was the bacterial flagellum. I learned about it in all sorts of other places, but my mind had really made him the expert. And he is the expert on that. But that's still who I kind of went back to. So as parents, we can do the same thing, where when it comes to sex, the first one to talk about it is the one who becomes the expert. My friend Elisa Childers did this with her daughter, where before her daughter was exposed to anything with homosexuality or gender, she discussed it with her, back when she was maybe 9 or 10, and said, have you heard about this? What have you heard about this? And well, now that you know what this is, if you ever hear about it, come and ask me questions. And to this day, her daughter has no problem coming to ask her questions because Elisa established herself as the expert. So moving on to the second half of the question in purity culture, I can't even tell you, even though I was kind of involved with that, it was the very beginning. I think a lot of times movements start out really healthy, and then insanity loves momentum. So the more momentum this thing gets, you have this insanity that slips in. This is what we saw happen with feminism, with a whole bunch of other things that started out legit and then just snowballed. Even a lot of the women in the launch group were talking about how they were not taught the goodness of sex and the beauty of sex and the purpose of sex. They were basically, virginity was put on this big pedestal. And I'd say a perfect poster girl for this would be Jessica Simpson. I know she's not really in our, periphery that much anymore, but she was like the poster girl in the 90s of the one that was saving sex for marriage. And after she got divorced from her first husband, Well, one of the next guys who dated her described her as sexual napalm. So basically this idea was she lost her virginity to her husband. And after that, you just don't even try it because virginity itself was placed as that's the golden idol right there, and not actually staying pure for marriage and knowing what the purpose was. So we had women in our launch team who were made to feel dirty after they were raped because now they didn't have that virginity that they could speak of. And so there's all these ways where people took the ideas of waiting for marriage and keeping the marriage bed pure and then try to reinforce it without understanding the reason behind it. And whenever you try to do something without understanding the reason behind it, it always turns into legalism because you are not looking at the heart of God.
Right.
And so, that's the chapter that Amy worked on. She's read a gazillion books on purity culture. She's talked to people. And it's just kind of like we tried to do something. I mean, like props to the Christian community for trying, but here's kind of how things sort of went sideways and how it blew up in our faces. And so maybe we can try to have a better approach by incorporating these reasons behind what we're teaching. Because, kids, all they knew is, nobody wants to chew bubble gum that someone else wanted to chew.
Yeah.
And after everybody plucks off a rose, the leader says, now who wants the rose? And of course, as we know now, it should be Jesus wants that rose. That's who wants the rose. It's like, you're not irredeemable. And this isn't the sex that's going to keep you from heaven, which there's a lot of kids that were kind of taught to believe that.
I was curious what would you say to a parent whose child is struggling with these issues, whether it be of their sexuality, whether it be of their gender? How would you kind of encourage them to begin reframing a child's mind to have a healthier view?
Yeah, I think I'll say specifically for gender, this is what I've kind of heard from so many different places. Gender theorists have taken the objective reality of biology and said that that's subjective. And they've taken something that should be subjective, which is cultural norms, and made that this like fixed point about what, you figure out what gender you are compared to this cultural norm of what femininity and masculinity are. So I think for parents whose kids are struggling with their gender, find out why. Start asking, just you place it in terms of, I really want to understand what you're going through. Because a lot of times there's real hurt, there's real anxiety that's going on there. And so a lot of times they just have this bad idea that, well, if I don't like the stuff that other girls like, then maybe I'm more of a guy. And as we see in one of the chapters, the genderbread person, which is sometimes known as the gender gender unicorn, there's all these different gender things. That's what it teaches, that if you don't fall in line with the stereotype, it might mean you're more of the other gender. And so reinforcing to them that, like, it's okay to love football and be a girl. It's okay to want to play with dolls and be a boy. It's okay to have a caretaking nature, and kind of reaffirming them how God created them without having them latch onto the secular idea of what gender is. And so in the gender section of the book, we really break it down to people trying to make gender this really mysterious thing, but the root word gen means that which produces. And so basically there's two options. If you are to produce new life, you have two possible contributions that you can make. It's going to be an either or. You either contribute a sperm or you contribute an egg. There is no spectrum between those two things, and kind of helping them tether that to their body, saying, this is what gender is, the word itself. This is what it means. And then just affirming them in a lot of their interests. Now, if you have someone who's questioning their sexuality, I think that one of the things that we can do as parents, just as young as possible, is start teaching about the different kinds of love. I think speaking English, it's a really difficult thing that we only have one word for all the different types of love. And they have to understand that not all love, not all strong feelings are sexual or mean that you want to be romantically involved with that person. In fact, the genderbread person is like, this romantic attraction is when you want to have an emotional relationship with someone. I'm like, good grief, people. That's just called friendship.
Right.
When you want to have an emotional relationship with someone. We've lost these different categories. And this, again, is where I think having the correct categories is so important. And so having these categories for the different types of feelings that someone is having, because I personally have a friend who mentors this girl who lost her mother. And she now has this draw towards women, and she's interpreting it as she's a lesbian. When in fact, it's just she has this crazy need to connect with the feminine because she lost her mom when she was young. So it's like understanding what's going on. I think most times whenever you see something going on with gender, with sexuality, with porn, whatever it is, there's usually some sort of unmet need that they're trying to express, and the world listens to that need and says, here's the solution. If we can take a step back and try to uncover what is this unmet need that they're trying to express, then we can come in with scripture and the love of Christ and maybe try to help them meet that need in a healthy way that's not going to mess with all the gender and sexuality stuff.
Wow, that's really helpful, especially that bit about, a lot of it kind of manifests itself because of unmet needs. Mm-hmm. That's super helpful. So kind of along the same vein, but a little different. What about, and these are questions I'm asking because I'm genuinely curious. What about, so transition now from the one who's struggling and trying to figure out to the one who's full blown embraced it. Mom, I'm a lesbian. Dad, I want to be a boy. Whatever. How does a parent navigate that when the kid's gone from struggling with it to saying, look, this is who I am and I'm embracing this? How do they maintain their Christian witness, maintain their integrity as a parent, but yet help them in that situation?
Are we talking about kids who are still under their care or maybe adult children?
I guess when I asked the question, I had more in mind like they're kind of out and they're living on their own, and the parents are trying to figure out like, what does my relationship look like now with my daughter who has just told me she's a lesbian, or my son who's just told me he's gay?
I think at that point, it's like that's when in some ways you release them to God because you did your job as a parent and you love them. And I think that everybody's kind of different. It really depends on all the different scenarios, but your job really just comes in ministry and loving them and being that Christ-like influence in their life. All the ones that think, oh, I'm going to cut off relationship. Well, you just cut off maybe the only representative Christ that they have. Now, there's certain things you don't have to go along with. In fact, I was just reading an article by Abigail Schreier, which if you haven't heard of her, she wrote the book Irreversible Damage, which is talking about this transgender craze that's seducing girls.
She got banned from Amazon, right?
Oh, yeah. I think she's back up on there. But I think they have a big book burning party over at Berkeley.
Right.
And that actually launched her because everybody's like, what? Why are they burning this book? It's a fabulous book.
Yeah, that's the best. That's the best advertisement for a book, right?
I know, right?
Book burning. I don't get it.
Oh, yeah.
Buy it to burn it. That's great.
Yeah, I know. Right? Burn away.
All publicity is good publicity, I guess.
Yeah.
But there was a story of a girl who was a transgender regret person. How do I say that? Transition regret stories, where she actually said her only lifeline to reality was the fact that her parents wouldn't call her by this new name or the new gender, and she hated them for it at the time. But the Lord was eventually able to grab a hold of her heart, and she still had relationship with her parents, and it made her so angry that they wouldn't adopt this new language. But that, she said, was her tether back to reality. So for the parents who are wanting to say, do I say this new name? Do I say this new gender pronoun? I would say that there is an evidence for that actually being a tether to reality. And a lot of the science does confirm that, especially with young children, the more you affirm them in whatever this new gender is, the more likely they are to persist in their gender dysphoria. When it comes to sexuality, I think a lot of times there's so many different causes for that. I mean, just based on the research, we can't say all gays are born this way, and we can't say no gays are born this way. So just recognizing that there's a spectrum. But there's also a lot of just anecdotal stories of people who have experienced some kind of sexual abuse, maybe some kind of bullying, all sorts of different stories. I think just being a detective and listening to whatever your child's story is and kind of help uncovering that pain and being a balm and loving them like Christ did through that pain, and allow him at that point. That's when you need to be just lifting up in prayer, just knowing that there's a spiritual stronghold that is here. Spiritual strongholds cannot be reasoned through. Spiritual strongholds have to be taken down in a spiritual way, and that is prayer. You'll hear the story by Christopher Yuan, whose mother fasted and prayed for him every week for like 20 years before he came out of the homosexual lifestyle. There's so much that we can do from the spiritual standpoint, and it doesn't guarantee that every kid's going to come back and change their mind or do whatever. But we have to know what's within our sphere of control and what's within God's sphere of control. And we can't confuse those. If we try to take on the role of the Holy Spirit, that's going to backfire.
Yeah.
But if we take on the role of just affirming everything, that's not a good idea too. But we can affirm maybe like still loving whoever they choose as their partner. And they're going to always know your beliefs. It's not like they're going to be confused of what your Christian beliefs are. And you can be clear that these are our beliefs while loving them. We need to sever this idea that love and affirmation are the same thing.
Amen.
And that's something that you see a lot in this culture, that unless you affirm this, that means you don't love me. And we just need to be committed to loving the person and not affirming lies. So how to do that can manifest in 1,000 different ways, but that's just kind of general principles to live behind.
No, that's helpful.
Wow, I love that nugget there. Love and affirmation are not the same thing. Super. And there's a lot of nuggets like that in the book. One of the things that I think is super helpful is in the book, it basically informs me as a parent what is actually being taught in culture today. The book itself teaches me as a parent that there's certain things that are being taught that, I have a hint about, but I didn't know. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? This is really what's being taught, where you kind of, for me, I might read a headline or hear something, but I haven't not known where to go to find out just what's being taught here, and it's scary and kind of shocking to the extent of it and how early. So that is a really super helpful resource in that regard for, at least a parent not being completely ignorant or in the dark in regards to that, because how can you address what you don't even know what's being taught? I mean, so, the book eliminates the ignorance aspect in that regard. My question, though, is, in your experience, what do you think might be one of the bigger obstacles that parents actually have for effectively preparing their kids? Is it that ignorance aspect, or is it a fear thing? Is it that they don't know, or is it things just moving so quickly that we're trying to play catch up? I mean, what are some of the barriers there, and how can we sort of help equip?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a combination of all those things that you said. And there's this one phrase that I can't remember who said it to me first, but is, if the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. I find that a lot of times we are just, and this is actually one of the things that I think was really kind of helpful about COVID. We have just become such a busy culture that we're just constantly, we're doing soccer practice, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing recitals, we have all these things that we're doing, to where it is a lot more difficult to be intentional with our teaching of our kids when you feel like you're being pulled in 1,000 different directions. And there was something really beautiful about COVID when people just were kind of forced to stop all that and thought, I've talked to many families who are like, you know what? I don't want to go back to the way we were before, how we were just constantly running from one activity to another. So I think busyness itself is one of those things where it just makes you forget maybe and overlook a lot of the stuff that's going on, just because, the tyranny of the urgent, that's not what I have to look at right now. I would say that ignorance and fear kind of go together, in the sense that I think ignorance causes fear. I think a lot of times parents can feel afraid of something because they don't understand it. In fact, if you look at I can't remember which part is, the notes from the author at the end is maybe our acknowledgments, that I say in there that this book is like the epitome of what it means for me to conquer fear. And there was a lot of ways where I didn't understand the full implications of everything that was going on. And it was a type of conquering fear and trying not to let that fear actually seep into the book. And once I started really understanding what was going on, I started feeling less fearful, and I started feeling more confident that I could talk about these things. So sometimes that ignorance fuels that fear, and that fear in turn makes you avoid a topic that you would otherwise engage in. So I think that in that sense, the word empowering on here, I think you get empowered when you start to understand something. So I think it's kind of a mixture of all those things that can be working against us. I
admit that, I've talked to Chad before and said, I don't mind talking to people about, a cosmological argument or Bible reliability. And I feel like, I'm welcoming that conversation. But this aspect of what we're dealing with in culture, this is like the farthest thing out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And so I'm only now kind of getting to the point where I'm like, the lights are coming on for me. And I'm like, all right, I want to get to now I'm starting to have that hunger to be able to wrap my head around it and be able to engage with more confidence from personally myself. So I appreciate what you're doing in the book. And I think that's true. But if parents can feel that way as well, it would be so helpful, you know?
I'd like to add one more thing to that I think you pointed out right there is that, sex has always been kind of a type of culture in every culture. I mean, let's face it. It's been a big thing in every culture. With our culture right now, where they are tying sex with identity, one of the things that I think a lot of people stay silent is because if you speak up even in the slightest, you will have throngs of people ready to cancel you, throngs of people that are ready to like, even before the book came out, people on my launch team were just posting quotes from the book about what marriage and what sex were. And they were having comments from other people who claim to be Christians on their things saying, teachers like her are the reason people commit suicide. Like, I was getting accused of causing people to commit suicide before people even started looking at the book. And that is one of the things that this is such a hornet's nest in our culture right now, that people, not only you have the people who are basically indoctrinated with all this ideology, but even the people who claim to be Christians are so ready to attack, because I mean, that tells you what the God is of this culture. And so you have to be prepared that when you challenge someone's God, that they will often come at you in an irrational way. An irrational way, you can't reason through someone's angry emotions. It's like you kind of just have to take it and love them through it and then hope for another opportunity. But that's a barrier that people are having as well.
That's the aspect where there's the huge difference is like, sure, for me, there's the knowledge gap where I'm ignorant of what's being taught and not sure how to address it. And then, but, when you're talking to someone about science, then it's like, oh, who has the most facts and understands the subjects can somehow rule that without having to be too pastoral, although there are, personal elements and, your interaction and tone and demeanor. But when it comes to a subject like this, the fear for me comes from not knowing it, but then it's such a delicate subject, as you say, a hornet's nest, where it's like, okay, you've got to be pastoral, you've got to be sensitive, you've got to be prayerful, and you've got to be ready to not care if you lose friends or, as you say, you're risking getting canceled or whatever. So that is the challenge.
You got to have a thick skin and be ready to just not embrace, but to weather the storm that comes after you when people emote over what they think you're saying.
Now, another cool thing in the book is that towards the end there, you provide some maxims that parents can use. And so you mentioned earlier how, from that psychologist that can't discern the difference between something that's familiar and something that is truth. And also you've said how the first person who says something is the expert. So you say, hey, we embrace the fact that as parents, we're in the position to say it first and to say it often and to repeat it long enough. And we're not going to apologize for that. That's our goal. And so you've include some of these maxims and things that can help kids internalize the things that we want to teach them and raise them up. So Hillary, just talk a bit about some of those things that you include towards the end of the book.
So like I'll say even the first two maxims that I have in there are things that you can start saying to your kid when they're 1 year old. And it actually is undercutting so much of what's going on with this transgender ideology. And that's what you do with your body matters. It's like, because we have this belief right now that what you do with your body doesn't matter, that the real me is this psychological aspect of me and everything else is just kind of this, meat covering that I can do whatever I want. But according to the Christian worldview, it's like we are this unified unit. You can't separate. If someone smacks me in the arm, I'm going to say, why did you hit me? They can't say, well, I didn't hit you. I hit your arm. It's understood that we are our bodies and our bodies are us. But for some reason, within a lot of the ideology, they've taken those things as being two different things. So always saying what you do with your body matters. Why do I have to eat my vegetables? Why do I have to brush my teeth? Why does my PE teacher make me do all these things? Because what you do with your body matters. Well, why? Well, then it comes to the second maxim, because God gave you your body to take care of it. And so some people like to say, the body is a gift. And I think that's sometimes a bad idea because our kids have seen us throw away gifts or re-gift gifts. But to introduce this idea of stewardship with someone as young as, 2 and 3 and 4 years old, that we are stewards of this body that God, that was given to us. And this is kind of a sphere of our authority, getting them to understand the idea of healthy spheres of authority. And then I'd like to say these maxims kind of are almost a summary of everything that's in the book. And here's like little bite-sized ways just to be repeating it over and over again so that the secular worldview doesn't become the predominant one. And this, of course, isn't comprehensive to where if, you say all 20 of these things, your kids are going to like walk with Christ forever. But, it's a good start for combating some of the really common sense nonsense that we have going on out there.
Hillary, it's been a great conversation and really appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely.
So where can you point our listeners for more on the book? I'm sure everybody knows how to go to Amazon or wherever, but is there any other resources and anything else you want to point people to? Yeah, just anywhere you get the books, christianbook.com, Amazon, lots of places to go there. Our first book is now in Hobby Lobby, which I kind of joked is like the Mecca, If we can get Chick-fil-A to cover it now, then we'll be at like our Mecca and Medina right there.
Yeah.
But if you want to know more just about Mama Bear Apologetics, my main thing is make sure you spell mama right. It's M-A-M-A. I've gotten 1,000 different spellings of mama. I had no idea that there were so many different ways to spell it, but mamabearapologetics.com. That's where our blog is. You can also look up the podcasts, which are coming a little slow right now just because of the book launch and me recovering from surgery. So that's where you can go to learn more about Mama Bear. We have a Facebook group that interacts. We're on Instagram. Now, technically, we have a Twitter account. I never interact on that. I think one of our other Mama Bears does, but Twitter is just, in my opinion, the cesspool of humanity. So, it had served a purpose at some point, and that purpose is gone.
That's why Chad's on there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I love Instagram.
Wow.
Someone introduced me to Instagram, for the last book, and now I love it. So, yeah, there's lots of places to find us.
Excellent. What's your cat's name?
Oh, this is Lula. Yeah, she came in for the very end of the interview.
We have cats as well. Chad does not. He's a dog person.
I am.
And that's okay. We still love you.
I love dogs.
He's on Twitter and he has a dog.
That's yeah. Okay. Who brought the dog? Okay.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you have a question you'd like us to address or just a message for us, feedback, good or bad, you can either email us at podcast@apologetics315.com or leave a voice message for us using SpeakPipe. Just go to speakpipe.com/apologetics315 to leave us a message. And remember, if you include a Ghostbusters quote in your question, we guarantee that we'll read it on the podcast. We also ensure up to 50% better quality answers. Also, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review in iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. And please share this episode with a friend if you found it useful. Remember, you can find lots of apologetics resources at apologetics315.com, along with show notes for today's episode. Find Chad's apologetic stuff over at Truthbomb Apologetics. That's truthbomb.blogspot.com. This has been Brian Auten and Chad Gross for the Apologetics 315 podcast, and thanks for listening.
Thanksgiving is almost here, and you're likely searching for the best deals on the finest wine, the coolest beer, and the smoothest liquor. Whether you're visiting or hosting friends and family, be sure to get your drinks from your neighborhood Goody Goody Liquor. With low prices and an incredible selection, our beverage specialists can help you pair the right drinks for your Thanksgiving gathering. Goody Goody, toast of the town. Find a store or shop online for curbside pickup or 2-hour delivery at goodygoody.com. That's goodygoody.com.
I always thought owning a vacation home was hard work, from finding guests to just maintaining it. But with Vacasa, they put my vacation home to work for me, caring deeply for my home in every way. Best of all, since switching from my last property manager, Vacasa has been earning us over 20% more. Because it's not just a vacation home, it's a Vacasa home.
Get your free vacation income estimate to see how much your vacation home can earn you. Call 469-529-6347 or visit vacasa.com/20more.